for that introduction. And thank you to everybody for joining us. Those of you who got up early this morning or who are having a very late night to watch this, I really appreciate it. And I value the time that you're giving to listen to me. And hopefully by the end of it, you'll be comfortable going out and just shooting beautiful food images and finding things around your kitchen and just doing it stress-free and just absolutely enjoying what you do, love what you do, and get it across in beautiful images. So I'm going to go into my presentation now. And as Medina mentioned, please feel free to ask questions. We'll have halfway through the talk, I'll do a Q&A session. And then at the end again, I'll do another Q&A session, just so that we can just stay on top of it. And no question is silly. No question is irrelevant. It's always worthwhile for everybody to ask questions. And yeah, it's the only way we're going to learn. So let's get into this, shall we? So yeah, about me. This is my chest beating time, and hopefully it's not my favorite part of giving a presentation, but it is important for you to know who I am. So I'm a natural light food photographer. I'm the founder of 80/20 Nutrition, which is the blog that really kind of got me into food photography. I'm currently writing my own recipe book, my own cookery book called A Healthier Family for Life. And I do a lot of work for Page Street Publishers. They're a Boston-based publishing firm. I photograph cookery books for other authors. So I will receive a manuscript. I will then cook. Well, I have to shop, because shopping is a very large part of food photography. So I'll shop, cook, style, photograph, post-production, and send back a completed visual imagery of the book. I also run food photography workshops and talks for Nikon School of Photography. And I'm a member of Godalming Photographic Club. A photographic club, I think, is really important to be part of, to be involved with other photographers. Even if it's not the same type of photography that you do, it's really important just to get just to get good photography knowledge. So as Medina mentioned, I'm very privileged to be appointed a Nikon UK and Europe ambassador, which is really exciting considering I'm the first food photographer to be appointed. And I think it's just exciting for food photography in general to have been recognized on such a large platform. I'm also a Rotolight Master of Light. I did mention I use natural light, but I will supplement with continuous lighting. So Rotolight is a lighting company, and I use a little Neo 2, which I use to supplement or to add extra full light. On days like this, it'll give me an extra hour of shooting. The other thing which I have to add to my title is that I'm a breast cancer survivor. This is my, a year ago, October, I was diagnosed. I've had a year of treatment and all sorts of things. And I'm very proud to say I got to ring this bell at the end of my treatment, which if anybody has experienced cancer, it's quite an exciting time to be able to ring this bell. So I think out of all of my achievements, this is probably one of my biggest. So why food? I'm always asked why food? How did I get into food photography? Well, as you can tell from my accent, I'm not British, I'm actually South African. And South Africa, we have 11 national official languages and cultures. And we are an incredibly diverse culture, and food is a very big part of our life. And so for me, food has been, I've grown up around loads of good food. My friends are all foodies, incredible restaurants. So yeah, so I just have this love for food. And so we moved from South Africa to the UK, and I decided to start my blog. Before I started photography, I actually worked for Investec Bank. I was in financial advising, and two very different careers, photography from banking to photography, very different left and right side of the brains required for both of those. I stopped working to have my two little monsters, which are now two big monsters. And during that time, I did a lot of, I was a stay-at-home mum, but I did a lot of creative work, which I really do think was an important foundation to what I do today. And yeah, I mean, they're now grown up and they're at university and out of university, and I'm able to actually focus purely on my career, which I'm fortunate. But this is where it all started. my images did not start out looking like they do now on Instagram. These were my original images that are posted on Instagram, and they're still there. I keep them up so that people can see. Anybody can go in and see where I started. You don't just pick up a camera and start to take beautiful images. It's a process. It's a learning curve. It's listening to talks like this. It's going out to workshops. It's researching. It's seeing how other photographers photograph. It's just constantly immersing yourself in photography and food to learn how to do a good shot. But yeah, I was very proud of these images, and I still am, because I think these were about 5 or 6 years ago that I had them, that I put them up. And it's always good to be able to go back and see where you've come from. I then started my Instagram account, then went on to create my blog, which is where I really sort of developed my skill for food photography. I realized I didn't enjoy writing. I didn't actually enjoy blogging. I enjoyed the photography side. And I started working with this range of magazines. I started submitting recipes to them and submitting images. It was free work. It was, but it gave me great exposure into learning to work with publications, and very exciting to be able to see your own work in print. So I did for a good few years. I submitted to them and started growing my contributions to them. So anybody in the UK who is interested in submitting recipes, they take submissions from anyone. You just need to get in touch with them. I think if you go online, you can submit directly with them. And it's a really good learning curve into getting into the into publication side of photography and recipe development. I later went on to submit some images into Pink Lady Food Photographer of the Year. That was my first stage. That was, at that stage, I didn't think that I was even a photographer. I didn't want to call myself a photographer even. And I submitted it. My first entry was in 2017, and I submitted into the food bloggers category, and I was placed third in that category. It was very exciting. I actually didn't realize the size of the competition and the importance of the competition at that time. But it was probably my pivotal moment in my career was submitting and then actually being placed. From there, I went on to it opened a lot of doors for me in my career. So let's get into some food photography, shall we? That's enough about me. All right, so learning to use your camera to bring out the best in your images. Some important aspects in food photography, which hopefully by the end of this, you might have a little bit of a better idea and a better understanding of approaching your food photography. So your camera angle is really important. Your aperture settings, that's whether you want a shallow depth of field, if you want the background to be blurred, or you want the whole image in focus. Your lens choice is also really important. Textures and props and styling of your food. Lighting, to me, lighting is absolutely essential, and that's not the end of it that you're going to hear about lighting. I promise you, by the end of this, you're going to be saying lighting in your sleep tonight. And then, of course, editing, which is really important when it comes to putting out your final image. So let's talk about some camera angles. Your camera angle, I think, is probably one of the most important parts of food photography, because it really determines how you're going to set up your scene. Your food is what determines your camera angle. It's got nothing to do with the mood that you're in for the day. If you're shooting a pizza, for instance, if you're shooting for instance, this is a hamburger, you would need to shoot that straight on, because you need to show the layers. It's got height. You want to be able to show the bun, the cucumber, the tomato, the lettuce, the cheese, the whole lot coming, the mayonnaise dripping out. If you shot that from overhead, all you would have is the top of a bun and a couple of sesame seeds. So your angle is really important. And if you were shooting a pizza, you would be shooting it from overhead so that you can see the whole top of the pizza. You would not shoot that from a straight on angle, because what would you have? Just a piece of crust and maybe a bit of cheese on top. 45-degree angle is a really interesting angle. If you're in between and you're not sure which angle to go for, then go for 45 degrees. That's anywhere between straight on and overhead. That is a great way to show either the top or the sides or a combination of the both. Here are some examples. So you can see the pancakes on the left, that's showing the different layers and it's showing height. So if I'd taken that from top on, you would have just seen the top of a pancake. The 3/4 angle, that shows a little bit of the sides, it shows some angle on the top, and with a 3/4 angle, you get to see what's happening in the background as well. And then we have a flat lay, which is also great. Flat lays are very popular on Instagram, and a lot of cookery books like flat lays. I think it's a comfortable angle for food photography, but again, you need to make sure that your food is actually right for a flat lay or for an overhead. Let's talk about some aperture settings. So I shoot with my camera in manual mode, and that gives me control over the aperture settings and how I want my whole image to look. So if I'm shooting straight on, I prefer to use a smaller f-stop. So anywhere from, I'll probably work from around, this was taken at f3, I'll probably work from an f-stop of about 2.5. I very seldom go lower than 2.5. On the odd occasion, I might go 2, but then I can start to blur a whole lot of my image, which and lose focus of what I'm actually shooting. So I think I feel comfortable anywhere around an f3. But what it does do is anything that I have in the background, it blurs it slightly. It gives you a shallow depth of field, and it creates a really soft and romantic feeling, which I think is really lovely. Gives you a story, but it doesn't take away from the hero, which is, in this case, the glass. If you're shooting an overhead or a flat lay, best to do it from a higher f-stop, so starting from an f5.6 up. Try to keep as much of it in focus as possible. And if you are shooting for clients, you always need to confirm how your client wants it. A lot of clients don't like a shallow depth of field. They like everything to be in focus. So it's really important to double check. If you don't have creative license on the images, it's best to double check how your client wants the images to be portrayed. So let's talk shutter speed. A fast shutter speed freezes action and motion shots. And a slow shutter speed is really good for letting in extra light into your sensor, and is perfect for dark and overcast days. So for days like this. So do use a tripod if you have your camera set on a slow shutter speed. Otherwise, everything will become blurred. You can end up with camera shake, and it's a waste of an image. So I actually use a tripod all the time now. Most of my images are shot on a tripod. It's just out of habit. It also means that if I go back to if I have to leave my camera for something, I can go back and it's in the exact same spot. If I have to fiddle around on the set and I have to move things around, I can go back and my camera and my tripod are still set up in the exact same spot. When I first started shooting, I was shooting handheld, and you definitely can't shoot handheld for anything less than 1/25 of a second. Even at 1/25 of a second, you could be pushing it a bit if you don't have a smooth hand. But yeah, so generally, so if you just remember, if you want to capture motion like in this flower shot, you really need to have a very fast shutter speed. And this was taken at 2000 ISO. I did bump the ISO up. I had to put the ISO up to be able to allow for a fast shutter. And to be able to let more light in. My camera can handle a 2000 ISO. It depends the ISO setting. I don't normally have any set requirements. I know a lot of food photographers will teach you around 100 ISO. I think that's a little bit low. It's very difficult to learn how to work with the shutter speed if your ISO is very low. So I prefer to, especially when I'm teaching people, just to bump the ISO up so you don't really have to think too much about what's happening, and that allows for extra light into the sensor to allow you a faster shutter speed. So I work anywhere between, if I'm shooting a book, it'll be around 200 ISO, but I'm happy to go up to even 2000. Right, so a couple of camera setting game changes that I've discovered over my time. So as I mentioned, I work in manual mode. It gives me far more control. I display the exposure meter in the viewfinder so that I know that I have a well-exposed image. I also work with a mirrorless Nikon Z7 at the moment, so that's got an electronic viewfinder, which allows me to actually see what's happening when I change my camera settings. I can actually see it in the viewfinder as it's happening, so I can have a better idea of what's happening with my exposure. I shoot in RAW. Camera setting, raw camera setting is really important when you go into post-production and you're doing editing. It just allows you to be able to manipulate the image slightly more, gives you a lot more freedom. I shoot with my white balance set to auto. I don't even have to think about white balance. I'm in a controlled studio environment, so white balance is not an issue for me. I turn on grid lines. I think grid lines, I'm obsessed with horizontal lines. It's not the last you're going to hear about it from me tonight. As I've mentioned, I use a lot of little spirit levels everywhere. I've got spirit levels. It's really important to make sure your camera is set with proper horizontal lines in camera, and then to ensure that your camera is set straight in the tripod. Again, like I've mentioned, never shoot handheld with a shutter speed less than 1/25 of a second. Live view, if you don't have automatic live view on your camera, I turn it on for overhead shots so that I can see. It's difficult for an overhead shot to look into the camera, so it's easier to turn live view on. So if you do have live view, definitely turn that on for overhead shots. And then a virtual horizon or a small spirit level to make sure that your camera is level. What's really important, why this is really important, is imagine you are photographing a table. If your table is not straight and you've got a plate on the table, your image will look like the plate is about to slide off the table. So really important to make that straight. And I think as soon as you start to make lines straight, it immediately elevates your images to a different level. So the lenses that I use. So the lenses you choose have a bigger impact on the image than the body itself. Zoom lenses move in and out and vary in focal length, whereas fixed lenses and prime lenses don't move. You have to move the camera closer or further away. I use fixed lenses, or I use a 50mm, 85mm, and a 105 macro. I do have a 24-70 lens that I use, but I forget that it's a zoom lens. So I normally end up moving backwards and forwards because I'm so used to using fixed lenses that I forget that a zoom lens, I don't actually have to do anything. So a 50mm is great for flat lays, for table scenes, to capture a wider styled scene. And it allows more for storytelling. It gives you more, it gives you ability to add more so that you can add more of a story to it. It's not great for close-up shots. It won't allow you to shoot very close up. If you do want that, you're gonna have to crop that in post-production if you want to make your image close up. 85mm, this is my favorite lens. It's a great lens for feature, and I believe it's also great for human portraiture. So double whammy if you are going to buy one. It brings the subject closer. So it's got a little bit of a telescope to it. So it brings the subject closer and it pushes the background further, allowing for a softer, more romantic background feel. And then the 105 macro is also one of my favorites. This is a great one because you can really get in and photograph close, get beautiful minute detail. And in the picture on the left, you can see the bokeh on that is absolutely beautiful. It pushes everything back and it just gives you a beautiful soft bokeh. So the 105 macro is a really incredible lens to have. And then you can use it from further back and you can still storytell with it. But the one thing I do have to warn you is you need quite a lot of space. So if you're in a confined area, you're shooting in a small area, if you're shooting in a small flat, or you're in a restaurant, you're going to need a lot of distance between you and your subject. So you do need to be aware of that. You can get really beautiful images. You just need to make sure that you have surface space. I know people have gone out and bought them and they can't actually use it because they can't get that distance between themselves and the subject. So just bear that in mind. And also if you're using a crop sensor, it will also change it. It'll make it even tighter. Okay, so my gear, I work with a Nikon D850, a Nikon Z7, and on and off with a Nikon Z6. Being a Nikon ambassador, I do have access to different cameras. So I'm fortunate enough that I get to play around with all of them. I have the 50mm f1.8, the 85mm f1.8, the 105 f2.8 macro, and then, as I mentioned, the 2470 f2.8, which I take generally on location. So if I'm shooting in a restaurant or if I'm shooting outdoors on location somewhere, that's the one I'll use, because I find it easier to use that lens than trying to change lenses during a shoot, particularly in a restaurant where I might be in a confined space, or I can't spread myself out too much to be, and also contamination of my lenses, chance that I could drop my lens. So I do find that the 2470 on location is much easier for me. Then I have a little Rotolight Neo 2, which is really beautiful for supplementing light on a bad day. And a spirit level. You see, spirit levels just come in every shape and form in this talk. So that's in my camera bag. So let's talk about some props and backgrounds. We'll get into backboards and surfaces. So styling can be kept really simple, just using rustic, textured and weathered backboards. Avoid shiny surfaces, so do be careful of anything shiny that's going to reflect. I say this might not be some other photographers, but for me, this is a big thing, is avoid yellow or orange toned wood. So pine, for instance, a lot of restaurants, if you're planning a restaurant shoot, it's the first thing I ask at a restaurant is what color are their tables? I'll even ask them to send me an image, just a quick picture of what their tables look like, just so that I can see, because somehow for me, food just doesn't work on a yellow or orange toned wood. So brown toned wood is perfect, or gray tones, but the yellow orange pine, which you often find in restaurants, can be very overwhelming and can take over an image. And then if you're starting out, the cooler natural colors are way easier to learn with. So you think the grays, marbles, blues, anything in that color tone is really lovely and just works well with everything. And then for me, definitely real is best. I go to the scrapyard, I'll buy massive chunks of wood, I get them to chop it up for me, I bring it home, and then I have trestle legs, I don't know if you can see them in the corner in the background, and then I'll set them out, add the planks to the trestle legs, in this case like this, and then I've got a shooting surface. I'm able to change those around. They're easy to store because obviously not one big board. And trust me, those planks, if they were all together on one big board, I would never be able to pick that up. Even one of those logs, those planks is really heavy. So, but it does allow me to get really beautiful wooden surfaces into my images. In case you haven't noticed, I use a lot of wood. Besides wooden planks, other background surfaces to look out for, different fabrics are great. Vinyl surfaces, I'll go into some vinyl surfaces with you now. Marble and tiles. So if you go to a home warehouse and you buy marble or tile backgrounds, you can get samples of those. They're great for using as backgrounds or for tiles, or even for a cheese board. You know, I mean, they're really great, and you can get them in so many different textures and colors. Printed backgrounds, there's certain companies that actually print different images onto different backgrounds, which are used for photography, which are really great. Paper, newspaper, wrapping paper, greaseproof paper. I like to get antique newspapers. They're really good. I find the modern day newspapers are very bright and colorful, which can be a bit distracting. So I do keep an eye out for antique papers that have more font to it than bright colored images, and news of what Boris Johnson's up to. And then metal baking trays. So this is an example of one of my baking trays. It's not massive. It's not huge, but it actually works beautifully as a surface. If I'm shooting something small, I've got an image that might come up later of eggs in a bowl, and it's literally just shot on the surface. So rusted old baking trays that you would never dream of putting any food onto to eat off, but just perfect for photographing on, because it just adds a really beautiful mottled texture that really actually enhances an image beautifully. So in terms of the online backgrounds that I use, I do have a lot of purchase backgrounds. So besides going to the hardware store and everywhere else, I'm constantly looking for backgrounds. It's a thing, and any of you foodies out there will know that backgrounds are a thing for us. So so if I'm not on the lookout for something totally unique and individual, I do actually purchase a lot of my backgrounds and my backboards. So when I'm not an affiliate to any of these companies, I'm just sharing what I know and who I've purchased and which work for me. Capture by Lucy do vinyl, really beautiful vinyl backgrounds. They I don't know the exact size of them, but they are quite large. They're perfect size for food photography. They're printed. They have different textures, different texture looks to them. And they're really ideal because you can spill on them and you can wipe them clean. You can roll them up and put them away. They're really small, especially if you have low storage space. They're ideal for something like that. Photoboards.org, very similar. They also printed images on the back on the surfaces, but they're solid boards. So they're square, and you have to be able to store them somewhere. But again, they're also wiped clean. MyLucy.com is a friend of mine. She's a Dutch photographer. She actually sells images on her website. She actually also now sells backgrounds, but she originally started, and you can still purchase images directly off her website. You can purchase high-res images and then go and have them printed yourself. So you can either print them onto paper, or you can print them through a printing company onto vinyl yourself. And then Food I Fancy, Tash paints, does hand-painted boards, which are really lovely, beautiful textures, beautiful colors. She adds texture, she adds paint. They've got a lovely finish to them, and again, they're wipe clean. So just a different array of different types of backgrounds that you find really that I find really helpful and really great to work with. I think I have probably around, I haven't counted, but I probably have around 40 or 50 backgrounds. So probably more. But I do love them. This is Capture by Lucy. She always gives my viewers a discount, a 10% discount, and these are just examples of the different surfaces that you can get. So they're really exciting. These are some of the ones that I have. You can see the top right hand side is actually a baking tray, so you don't need to go and hunt for on the hunt for a rusted old baking tray like I have. You can actually have a nice clean image of a picture that you can put your food down onto and then maybe even eat it afterwards. But yeah, you can see there's wooden planks, there's brickwork, there's all sorts. So really lovely colors and textures. Okay, so crockery. This is really important. So choose a variety. When you're out on the hunt, choose a variety of different shapes and sizes. Bigger isn't always best. Side plates, when it comes to styling, side plates work so much easier. You can dish a whole meal onto a side plate and make it look like it's all on a full plate. So it's, it'll end up looking like it's on a full dinner plate. But side plates just fit so much better into a frame in terms of photography. Matte finishes are great. They don't reflect light. It is nice to have a couple of shiny pieces, but overly shiny can give too much away about what's happening inside your studio or the area that you're working in. Cheap isn't always the way to go. I do love charity stores. I do a lot of shopping in charity stores, but I then also invest in some good quality original handmade pieces. I like to find ceramicists and potters who I can work with and really get something made up just the way I want it to look. And be cautious of designs and bright colors. They can work really well if you style them correctly, but if you're learning and you're still trying to get into the styling, it can be really difficult and complicated to make it work. So my advice to you would be just to stick to simple neutral color tones. You can choose black plates, white plates, gray, but yeah, just I think to make it easier, try and stick to simple neutral color tones. Cutlery, vintage is best. It doesn't have to be old and rusted like mine. I probably go over the top a little bit with the vintage look, but still older pieces that are a little bit more tarnished, that aren't high reflective, definitely the route to go. Again, it will tell the story in a reflection. So I've seen it many times where there's been a spoon, somebody's had a dessert spoon propping up in a bowl, and you can actually see exactly, if you zoom into the spoon, you can see exactly what's going on. You can see the photographer, you can see the tripod, you can see the camera. Sometimes you can even see the make of the camera. It's that clear. So do be careful. They can give away a lot of what's going on. So if you are trying to use a modern twist and you don't want the old tarnished, rusted look like I work with, then just get a matting spray from the hardware store and spray it on just to take that little shine off. Beware of big cutlery pieces. If you are working with a small plate, if you're working with a small dinner plate, you need to ensure that the knife and fork actually match it. You can't have a side plate as a plate and then have a really large knife and fork. It's going to look out of proportion. So do make sure that that your cutlery matches your pieces. And don't crowd your food with cutlery. It's there to add and enhance the story. It's not there to take away from the actual food itself. So it's not all about the cutlery and the crockery. It's about just adding a little bit of interest, leading the eye into where you want your viewer to be looking at, and just complementing the story. And when you're out prop hunting and scavenging like me, or look for more than just knives and forks and dinner plate settings. Look for odd things, tea strainers, nutcrackers, ice cream scoops, sifting, flour sifters, all sorts of different things that can add interest and can add to your story. It's, when you start to increase your prop collection in terms of different things, you can really enhance stories with the storytelling. So if you don't have a nice flour sifter, you can't kind of get that story across as well. So it just allows you to become more creative and to be able to add more to your repertoire of photography. To use, although looking at that's not very neutral. There's a very bright pink in there. Don't think I've ever used that pink, but it's in my fabric selection. Placement. You need to be able to scrunch up a piece of fabric and have it stay there instead of pooling and just disappearing and falling flat. So I call it the scrunch factor, where you scrunch it and prop it up and it just stays where you've left it. That allows for the light to shine around it. It shows creases, it shows interest, it shows texture. It just really enhances. I also choose pieces that have little frayed edges or scalloped edges. This, for instance, has a little bit of a scalloped edge. This one has a line across it. I'll play around with the line, the way I fold it, the way I lay it, so that the line can create a leading line into the image. So, the stripe will create a leading line into the image. So, so I always try and find something that's quite neutral, but can still add a little bit extra to the image. Table runners are really great. They're narrow enough. You can run them from one corner to the other. You can create leading lines that way. And if you don't like the scrunch look, so I like to have everything scrunched and creased. But if you don't, make sure that if you are going to iron it, so say for instance it's a tablecloth or a napkin and it is ironed, you need to ensure that you iron the folds out. So folds will detract from your image. So if you have a tablecloth and you're doing an overhead shot, you need to ensure that those folds are ironed out. Also, if you're going into a restaurant and they have tablecloths on their tables, again, you need to ask them, either take an iron with you. I know it sounds crazy, but you might have to, or ask them if they can iron it out, if they have an iron available. But yeah, folds can be a big deterrent. My glassware, I again like to have textured glassware. The reason being is that it stops, it really reduces the amount of reflection that happens, and it just adds a little bit of extra interest to the image. And then pretty much most of my glassware is clear. I will use a couple of colored glass pieces, just if my food is quite boring, if I've got a brown dish or something that really needs to be enhanced in other ways, then I'll play around with colored glass. But otherwise, a clear glass with a really interesting color drink in it, which you can shine some light through to really bring out some color and some reflections, is a lovely way of showing glassware. But make sure that it's clean. In my box, I have a styling box. One of the things I have is window wipes that I wipe down all of my glasses before I pour anything into, because if you've got a thumbprint or a fingerprint on that glass, it will show up in your final image. So you need to ensure that they are clean and they're not grubby in any way. And sometimes they look clean to the naked eye, but it can come across as grubby in an image. So very important. And then extras over and above that. I love buying books. I have books from all over. But over and above that, I get, as I mentioned, antique newspapers. I have old cartoons, comic books, salt and pepper sellers are really good. Salt and pepper pinch bowls. This is actually a little candle holder that I put salt and pepper into. Just added, I'll show you in some of the later images, you'll see they just add a little bit of interest. But it's nice to have them. I have them in a variety of different colors and shapes. Little metal one that I have here. Even have a little cup, little enamel cup, great for egg cups. That's really lovely egg cups. So what might not be obvious, if you get really creative, you can actually turn everyday things into something really interesting. I get asked where I get my antiques from. For those of you in the UK, and particularly I'm in the southern area and the southwest, Sunbury Antique Market at Kempton Racetrack is before COVID, was a great way to go and antique hunt. Every second and last Tuesday of every month. And there's sellers that come across from Europe. They used to come across, and it's just enormous. It'll take you a good part of a day to get through and get some really, really good bargains. Etsy and eBay, really good, really lovely place, great places to find props. I just type in vintage. So I go vintage ice cream scoop or vintage newspaper and get a selection from there. So you've got to keep checking it. You don't always find what you're looking for. Sometimes I'm not looking for anything and I find something anyway. So I just take a moment and pop onto particularly eBay and go and look at vintage things. But what you do need to know is that having loads of props will not automatically make you a better photographer. And this is something I hear all the time from people. They say, oh, Donna, I don't have enough props, so I can't put out the work. I can't put out a great image. And it's so not about that. It's about using what you have and making whatever you have work for you. When I first started out, I used what I had in my kitchen. I didn't have a whole selection of props that I could turn to. I slowly but surely built them up. I'm now at the point where I prefer to go prop shopping than any other type of shopping. But, when I first started, I was just using basic plates that I had in my cupboard. I was using glasses that were in my glass cupboard. So I just made do with what I had. And you can be a really good photographer and not use a large selection of props. There's a number of incredible photographers who use the same props. They've developed a style using the exact same look. So don't fall into the trap that you have to have loads of gear and loads of backgrounds and props to make you a better photographer. It definitely doesn't work that way. Do we have any questions?
I was just going to say, if we have any questions, just send them in the chat and we will answer them. But so far there is no questions, Donna.
No questions. So
yes.
Everybody all good?
Yeah, thumbs up.
Okay, good. So I think I'm going to give it just a couple more seconds in case somebody's frantically typing. Do we have more people online? Have we got any exciting places that everybody's from? I can see Scott's online. Hi, Scott. Scott's from America.
Okay. Okay. I want. If you want, I can unmute Scott. Actually, I will.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay. So are we? Everybody's so riveted. They're not asking any questions. Okay. We'll carry on.
Okay. There is one.
Okay.
So do you see it now, or you want me to read it?
No, you're going to have to read it to me.
We have an 18-55 lens and a 50 mm lens. Will the 1855 be okay for close-ups in the absence of the other lenses you mentioned?
An 1855.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think again, you're going to have to photograph and then crop in. You know, if you obviously you'll have to know what your focal length is and from your subject, but that would probably work really well for an overhead overhead setup. But yeah, I don't think you're going to be able to do macro shooting with that lens.
And there is another question, is actually from Roberta. She's asking, what is your favorite lens to work with?
Mine is 85 millimeter. It's not always the first choice for food photographers, but for me, it's definitely my favorite lens to work with. If I was going in order of what you should purchase, I would say the 50 millimeter is the go-to starting lens to start food photography with. The 85 millimeter is definitely a step, another one you can add at a later stage. And neither of them are really expensive lenses. So they're really affordable and they're really good lenses. Yeah, so if you're starting out at 50 millimeter is great. And then at a later stage, maybe invest in an 85 millimeter. But definitely the 85 millimeter, that's what I shoot books with. That's pretty much my go-to. I'll use a 50 millimeter if I'm doing an overhead shot, because I can get more storytelling into it. I can get more of a setup going in the 50 millimeter, but the 85 millimeter definitely, because I prefer to shoot mainly front on, like in this image, for instance, then 85 millimeters is the one that I would go for.
Okay, there is one more question. Let's answer it and then go ahead to continue. Okay. So one more question is, how often do you diffuse your window light?
I don't diffuse it too often because if I've got a large area. You can see this is my shooting area behind me. So my windows are really big, so it's really difficult to diffuse the whole window. So for me, and often I find that the diffuser actually reflects into what I'm shooting. So if I'm really struggling with reflections in that, my diffuser will actually still show in the image that I'm trying to set up. What I prefer to do is actually just move my setup away from the window, so further away from the light, to soften the light on that. So so yeah, I don't particularly diffuse my lighting too much.
Okay. No more questions so far?
That's all.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to get into some composition and styling tips. So things to consider when you're composing or styling a shot. So do you want it to be light and bright or dark and moody? This is really important. This really establishes the whole basis of your image. The color of your food is really important. So if you're working with something really bright, so say for instance you're working with strawberries, do you want your background to be darker? Do you want your background to be bright colored? If it is going to be bright colored, then it might be competing with the food that you're shooting. So really important to take the color of your food into consideration. If you're shooting with brown food, for instance, it's really important to then add extra color in through props, through backgrounds, through other things that can add interest to that food. So again, props. Are you shooting with contrasting or monochromatic? These are all really, so the three of those, whether you're shooting a light and bright image or dark and moody, the color of your food and then your props are really important in setting up your styling, the styling look. And then for me, what I find is really important is to concentrate on the food and then add the props. And make sure that your props have a function. So if you are shooting a main meal and it's a nice hearty stew, don't put a teapot in the background. It's got nothing to do with that image. It's got no function whatsoever to do with that. And that being, and along the same lines, if you are shooting, make sure that the props that you add are culturally acceptable. So if you are shooting a curry, you wouldn't put chopsticks into a curry image. So make sure that all your props add the correct function. And when in doubt, if you don't know, if you're really struggling with composing a shot, or you're really struggling with styling a shot, just go in close and crop. Don't be afraid to crop either the plate or the food itself. Really, it's a powerful way of showing a food image without having to stress too much about the styling or composing side of it. So if we get into odd numbers just really work beautifully in terms of composition. For some reason, even number, it's just too uniform. Odd numbers, they just create a little bit more excitement when you look at them. And so styling in numbers of 1, 3, 5s going up the list from there. Really just make it, it allows your eye to fall in the position where you want it to look. You know, if you look at these flowers on the right hand side, immediately you can see that there's flowers there, but immediately the eye falls onto the one egg that's standing out. So if you are struggling with composition, just check your numbers. Just check to see that you are in fact working with I particularly find 3 is a comfortable number to work with, 3 and 5. So just check if you are working in odd numbers. Triangles, also really, really important in terms of styling. Now you're going to think I've gone mad. You're going to say, Donna, triangles, that's a whole bunch of soup. But if you look, there's actually 10 triangles that have been built into that image. I struggled with the composition of that image, and when I took a step back and I built it again into triangles, there's large triangles, small triangles, but it was all centered off the main image, the main big bowl with the spoon in the middle, and then I built smaller triangles off that, using these little pinch bowls again as extra bowls for smaller triangles. And then it's not only the placement of the plate that that needs to be placed into triangles, but the actual way that you build up a dish. So the way you style a dish. So for instance, this bowl of popcorn, you need an anchor point to be able to send the viewer's eye to, which would be the top of this triangle. So it's really important so whenever you're dishing up a plate, especially if you're taking a straight on shot, it's nice to be able to build it up into a triangle. So to give it a bit of a peek to look at. And then obviously, if in this case, I would set my focal point to the tip of the triangle to give that an anchor point so that I can get as much of that area of that image in focus as possible. Because obviously the dripping, I wanted to include the drip into that as well. Negative space, also really powerful. And again, this is something I learned as I developed as a photographer, that space doesn't always have to be filled. Negative space can be just as powerful as a heavily styled image. It speaks for itself. A lot of publishers will require negative space so that they can add font. If you're working with a client, they may ask you for negative space because they want to be able to add, if they're doing a brochure, they want to be able to add some font into it as well. But I know that it can sometimes feel as if it's a little bit bare, a little bit naked. But if you've got a powerful background and you've got a strong background, you can leave it empty. You don't have to overstyle to make it a strong shot. Well, what makes a photographer great is understanding light. And here I go with my light. It's always. So light makes photography. Embrace light, admire light, love it. But above all, know light. Know it for all you are worth, and you will know the key to photography. That was George Eastman who said that, and he was the founder of Kodak. So I think if anybody knows light, it's George Eastman. So in terms of light, for food photography, one window, directional light, either from the side or from behind, is the most flattering. So find the best window, preferably close to the kitchen, and that allows you space to move around. You don't have to stick to that same window throughout the year. You can move around. I've got different windows that I use. I use one window in that direction, one window in that direction, depending on the light, depending on the day, depending on the time of the year. But constantly check your shadows. That's really what's the most important. So I'll go through explaining how to work on shadows. Use a diffuser. If you, like I said, my windows are actually really big. I can't actually block them out unless I've got sort of sheer curtains. But even the biggest diffuser is not big enough for my windows. But so if you have a small enough window and you can use a diffuser, then go right ahead and use it. Otherwise, move further away from the window, which is what I said I normally do. I'll use a reflector to bounce light. If my light is really low and I'm struggling to get light into an image, I'll put a reflector or a whiteboard on the other side that will bounce the light back onto the image so that I'm getting a little bit of light from both sides. Also, if I've got a very heavy shadow on the left-hand side and I want to lighten that shadow a little bit, then I'll add a reflector just to bounce the light. Never the gold. If you have one of those sets of reflectors, you get a white one and a silver one and a black one and a diffuser. Don't use the gold. The gold's perfect for portraiture photography, but not great for food. So either the white or the silver. Beware of flash or house lighting. That's really important. So don't let your lighting sources compete. So I have overhead lights. I don't have great lighting in my house. It's perfect for a dinner party, but it's really not good for shooting photography. And that I always have to, and it's very yellow. So I have to ensure that my house lighting isn't on when I'm shooting within the studio, and that I'm either using my natural light and or my rotor light to enhance. The rotor light has a Kelvin setting so that I can actually change the light, the color of the light to whatever light I'm needing to put into the image. And then again, use the exposure meter in your camera. That's the little, if you don't know what the exposure meter is, it's sort of the little seesaw that you can see at the bottom. If your camera is set to manual, you'll see a little seesaw that if you change your camera settings will go up and down. If you can try and keep it in the middle, just use that as an experiment. Try and keep your exposure meter in the middle is a great way to start learning about exposure in your camera. And then do the egg test. So this is the egg test. And you literally take an egg around the house to different windows that you would potentially be shooting from. And depending on the room, if you've got if you've got light sources from other areas, turn off your light sources, close your curtains, and go to one window in that room. And if you turn your egg into different positions, you'll see how your shadow changes. And what you're looking for is the picture on the right, where you've got a highlight coming in from one side, and then it feathers down into a shadow. So you've got a tonal gradient with your shadows. That is ideally what you're looking for. That will add beautiful dimension, beautiful depth to your image. This image on the left-hand side is with the light taken from, with the light coming in from behind me. So the light coming straight onto the egg. You can see it looks flat. It's got no shadows. It looks very, very sort of, very one-dimensional, two-dimensional. It's just doesn't have any shape to it whatsoever. And that's absolutely perfect for portraiture photography, because you don't want to see skin wrinkles and any sort of anything that makes you want to look a little bit smoother and softer. But when it comes to food photography, you want to be able to see the textures, you want to be able to see the lines and the folds and the beautiful pastries and all of that. You want to be able to see all of the elements of the food. So so again, if there are any portrait photographers who are watching today, it's really important to try and change that approach in how you look at your light. You want as much light as possible. You want shadow into your images. So the egg test, your family are going to think you're crazy walking around with an egg, but really great way to find the perfect window. And then directional lighting again, these are just some examples. So these are eggs with the light coming in from the right-hand side. You can see the shadows going off in a feather direction to the left-hand side. And then backlighting is really great for drinks. Lovely, really great way to enhance drinks and show their color and bring out the highlights and on drinks. Anything with oil, anything flat. So for instance, a tart or anything like that also can be beautifully backlit. It is a little bit more difficult working with backlight. You do have to play around a little bit more with it, but it is a fun way of working and getting light into your subject. So this is what happens when you let house lights and natural light compete with each other. So you get a difference in your lighting colors. And you can see these are just my regular overhead lights. Somebody came in and turned on the lights while I was shooting. And you get a difference in light sources. So if you're shooting in a restaurant, you do have to be aware of overhead lighting. Sometimes it's not really visible to the naked eye, but it will come up, particularly in post-production afterwards. It will definitely be enhanced. So do be aware of that you're not fighting natural light sources. And then, what I've given you are just examples. So break the rules in a good way. Using harsh light. This is really harsh light. Most people, most sort of tutorials will say you want soft feathered lighting, but harsh lighting is also a fun way of playing around with things. So it's always good to experiment and to play around and to break the rules and whatever. Not always rules, they're guidelines, but just go for it. Just have some fun with it. That's one of the images that I did using harsh light, using this back window behind me. So you just really have to learn to watch light and shadows, and not just through the lens, but everywhere. Everywhere I go, I look at lighting. I look at how I always tell a story of how I was on the bus once and I was behind a bald man, and as the bus changed direction, I noticed how the light changed across the back of his head, kind of like my head in motion. And it's fascinating. I just love the way light falls onto things, and it's not just a fascination for photography. It's just a fascination in general, and it's really important to start seeing shadow and light. And really just seeing the difference of how the shadows look, whether they're harsh or whether they're feathered. Right, so I'm going to go into deconstructing an image and how I put together the look. So this is a setup. So I have my wooden planks, I have black card. I normally would have that quite a large area enclosed, but I wanted to show that I've actually got white tiles, which you can see behind me. My window is to the right, and then I have a canvas background that I have set up in the background. I then start by adding layers and textures. I have a wooden board, which I put in the front. You can see my shooting surface, my wooden background, and the background is not actually in focus, but it does add an element of texture to the image. And then my background, again, not in focus, but you can see that there's something there. It's not just disappearing into a dark infinity. And then fabric. So that is creating a leading line all the way from the back to the front. You can see I've got the original image up on the left, so you can see how I'm building it up. So then I added, to match the rusty board, I added a rusty bowl. And this whole shoot was decided based on the color of the food. So based on the red pears that I was shooting, they're pears and poached wine. That my whole color palette was based around that. The pears obviously being red on the outside and yellow on the inside. So that's where the woody rusted look came from. So I added the rusted plate. There's a bit of red paint on that board in the background, which is showing up. You probably wouldn't even notice it if I hadn't pointed it out to you, but it's just something that I picked up and tried to incorporate into the picture. And then obviously the red rim from the plate. And then by adding extra glassware, I created my triangle. So from the large port decanter all the way down to the smaller glass, and then down to the triangle shape of the pear. So you can see where I'm bringing triangles in that aren't necessarily visible, but it allows the eye to jump around the image. So people, when I'm often asked how long it takes me to put together an image, and some of them can take 5 minutes and some of them can take 3 hours. So what really goes into building a set for a picture? So this I took last year. I had a variety of different pumpkins, all different shapes, sizes, textures, and colors. Not easy to put together, let me tell you. I wanted to create a real autumnal feel to the image, and I really wanted to show the different pumpkins. So I brought the wood in because I like to work with wood, but also the color palette just worked really well with these pumpkins. So I added the wood, I added the boxes, the wooden box in the background, and I added the large book that I put them onto. Now, I am crazy about fairy lights. If you've seen my Instagram work, you'll know that I love fairy lights. I love having little bokeh lights in the background. So I was convinced I was going to get fairy lights into this and get some nice bokeh going, but it just didn't work. It didn't look right. It just the lights were too rigid, and they were just sort of forming the straight line, which didn't feel natural. I added the blue fabric in the background because I wanted to soften it with a bit of fabric, but that didn't work. And I see now, I remember I took this last year, so I don't have a clear memory of exactly what I did, but I see that I have leaves lying around. So I would suspect that might have something to do with me throwing some leaves in and trying to catch some leaves in motion falling on it, which definitely didn't work. So that was one of my attempts at trying to get the image. I then got these. I have an array of dried flowers, fresh flowers, and I thought I'd soften the image by putting some flowers in. But I felt that when I took this image, I felt that the flowers just took too much away from the pumpkins, and that as soon as you look at this image, the first thing you look at is the flowers. So it takes away from what I'm trying to do, which is show off the pumpkins. So I moved the fabric away, opened up, added a bit more light into the image, but I still didn't feel that. I felt it was still a little bit too clumped together. There wasn't enough balance that was going into this image properly. And also the flowers were just too heavy again. So what did I do? I put fairy lights back into it because that's what I do. I love my fairy lights, and nope, they didn't work. You can see the straying. Wasn't able to get the beautiful bokeh effect that I was trying to achieve. So I think I had to retire that idea. So I moved the flowers to the back. I added a new blanket into the picture, and I propped up, and I got a few. So if you trying to add a little bit more balance to some of your subjects, you can actually stand them on other things in the background, which aren't going to be seen. So I raised that pumpkin in the background. I probably put it on a bowl or a plate, which allowed me to prop up the white pumpkin on the right-hand side, so that you could actually see that it wasn't round. It was almost like a flying saucer. It was a sort of it was an odd-shaped pumpkin, but it had this beautiful sort of scalloped edge to it. But again, I just felt that it was just lacking something. So this was my final image, and I broke up the flowers and I created a cascade. I filled in some of the dark patches with the flowers, and yeah, I mean, that was the final image that I settled on, and then obviously added it into post-production. So you can see that it doesn't just happen immediately. I can have a visual image in my mind of what I'm trying to put together. I can draw up mood boards. I can do all sorts of things. But then when I get to the actual putting it together and setting it up, it can come out looking totally different. And it's a process. It's a process. Sometimes it's stressful. Sometimes I have to step away and then go back to it and look at it with fresh eyes. And other times I just keep going, and I'm moving things and tweaking things and adding things and taking things away until I know that I've got my hero shot. And you know when you've got your hero shot, you know when you look at it, that's the final shot. But just remember that Rome wasn't built in a day. So yeah, it's not a 10-minute thing. It's a process, and you've just got to be patient with it. So just a few behind the scenes shots. These are my apple tartlets that I shot. It's a strange connection that I have with this image, because I didn't enjoy shooting it. I was really struggling with the light. My camera setting was wrong. My camera had been changed to JPEG. Somebody had been fiddling with my camera, and when I tried to edit it in post-production, it was really difficult. So this image was just a struggle from beginning to end, and it actually ended up becoming one of my most popular images. I ended up selling it as a magazine cover. But even now, I still look at it and I still feel the struggle. I probably feel the sweat and tears that I felt over that image. But yeah, so this was just the behind the scenes. Again, you can see my reflector up. I'm really struggling with the light. It was late in the afternoon. I think I had my family hovering for apple tartlets, and I knew that I wasn't going to be able to reshoot it the next day because they'd probably all be eaten by then. So that's kind of where that image came from. This is, I was doing lilac infused water in this image. You can see that's my rotor light on the right-hand side, just adding a little bit of extra light into the water to create a little bit of a shadow. It's not exactly the same setup, but you get an idea. I think the glasses had been moved around a little bit, but you get an idea. So the rotor light was really just to blast extra light into the glassware to create an interesting bit of shadow and add some nice dimension. This is a ginger shrub that I shot using backlight, and you can see again, for a drink, it really brings out the beautiful bubbles that you have. It brought out the color and the honey, and just adds that extra element of light, which is really beautiful in a drink shot. There I did use the diffuser. So whoever asked me about the diffuser, I did use it, but you can see the size of the diffuser against the window. It's not very big, but I actually used it as a background. So it actually wasn't used to diffuse light. It was really used, it did probably end up diffusing light, but it was mainly used as a background. So that's what gave me that beautiful misty kind of moody feeling to the background surface. This was a shot that I did for Nikon right at the beginning of lockdown. We were trying to do some images that showed simple household products that can be ingredients that can be shot. And I was really struggling with this image. I was struggling with the light. It just was looking very flat, very boring, and literally like a piece of bread. And you can see on the right-hand side, the door is open. And what happened was my dog started to scratch at the door. And I opened the door to let him out, and the light hit the window and reflected that shard of light straight onto my subject. So that's where that image came from. So again, playing around with light, open windows, close windows, move your reflectors. You can really manipulate light to your advantage. I do have, and I know I get asked this question often, I do have a white bounce board that is just a piece of white foam. You can see it in that picture, and that's just softening the shadows. The shadows were really dark on the left-hand side, so it was just softening the shadows a little bit. So it was bouncing a little bit of light back onto the subject. And then these were eggs. So this is an example of working with harsh light. So the light was really harsh. I closed off the curtains from my other light source, and my light source was coming in from the window on the right-hand side. But my subject is actually quite far away from the window. If I'd had it closer to the window, my light would have been a lot harsher, and my shadows would have been a lot heavier. But by moving my subject further away from the window, you can see I've got those beautiful long shadows that are created by the egg box. You can see it actually on both images. So if you find that you move things away, move things closer, have a look what's happening with your shadows, constantly see where they're going and what's happening with them. This was an oyster mushroom. This is just an example of backlight with extra full light coming in from the rotor light. But you can have a really powerful shot, again, with literally just a backboard and your subject, but lighting just brings out everything. So, and that taken from the side would have been a very different image to taken from with the light coming from behind. And then this image that you saw earlier, you can see I've got just a canvas background, some fake flowers in the background, and then lots of 0% alcohol champagne bubbling around there. And my rotor light. So I've got my rotor light at an angle shining into the glasses just to really bring out the light from those bubbles in the champagne. And then this again is in my dining room, and it's with the image closer to the window, with the subject closer to the window. And you can see this was actually using the 105 macro lens that I was talking about earlier. It's taken from further back. You can see how far away my camera is from the actual subject. So that's what I was talking about, needing quite a large surface area to be able to, quite a large area to be able to shoot from. And I use every window. I use every part of the house that I possibly can. So although I've got a full studio set up, if my lighting's not right for that day, I'll move it somewhere else and I'll set up somewhere else. So everything is movable in my studio, and it can be moved around different parts of the house. And as you can see, I've got the canvas board clipped up to the curtains, and closed the rest of the light sources off. And in this case, that's actually me in the image. So what I would have done is I would have put my camera onto timer, set the camera, and then gone around and run around and then poured the caramel onto the cake to get that shot. So, oh, there's my rusty tin tray. So you can see that's the size of it. It's not that big. And that's what a beautiful rusted tin tray looks like. So shoot every day. Try and shoot as much as you possibly can every day, even if it's just raw ingredients. I mean, raw, simple ingredients are so powerful, and it just teaches you so much about composition. So yeah, try and do whatever you possibly can. Right, so just quickly, we're going to go into editing and then we're going to be done. So switching to raw in your camera allows the editing to, it leaves you the process, the ability to be able to go and do your own editing. If you're shooting in JPEG, your camera will do what it thinks needs to be done to the image in terms of editing and adding contrast and saturation and sharpening. Whereas if you shoot in RAW, you almost have sort of a blank canvas where you're able to go and do your own manipulating, and that's really good. So switch to shooting in RAW, and the camera leaves the editing alone. You can then apply the contrast, saturation, and sharpening, but at the level you like and what the photo needs. Audrey Ann from Live Snap Love, which is a great blog, online blog. So every image can do with enhancing, even if it's big or small, even if it's small changes. It doesn't have to be big. And when I talk about editing, I'm not talking about manipulating. I'm not saying remove the glass entirely from the background, as you would say in Photoshop. I do my editing in Lightroom, and it's an extension of what I do, and it's quick and easy, and I love the editing process. But it does allow you to really bring out colors and textures and surfaces, and create a mood. And it gives you a second chance to perfect an image. So this was actually for a client shot. It wasn't part of what I was shooting. We were topping up the cup of hot chocolate. And I happened to have my camera in my hand, and the model was pouring into the cup. And I just got that beautiful blob as it broke the surface. I obviously didn't want the plastic jug in it, and I was able to remove that, and I was able to really bring out that big, beautiful droplet as it hit the surface. It brings out certain aspects of the image that you want to bring to the viewer's attention. So in this case, too much of the model, too much happening in the background, I was able to crop it in and really just bring in the attention of the food rather than everything else that was going on. And then it also helps you to create an instantly recognizable style. So when you're posting on Instagram and somebody's going through Instagram, you want them to stop and go, oh, that belongs to so-and-so, that image, because it really does make a difference I kind of keep my editing style the same across the board. So it does create a style within my photography range. So it's not just about my props and my backgrounds. It's also as much about my editing enhancements that I make. So the lessons I've learned along the way: constantly study light and shadows. Surround yourself with food images. Pinterest, Pinterest, food magazines, travel magazines, Waitrose magazines are fabulous for food images. Learn to shoot in RAW and manual. Planning is essential for running a smooth shoot, always. Buy props when you see them. Biggest mistake I've learned is I'll often say, oh, no, I'll go back and I'll get it some other time, and it's gone. So buy it when you see it, even if you don't need it. You know, there's many props that I wish that I bought that I hadn't. Play around with breaking the rules. It's how you create your own unique style. And when I say rules, I mean guidelines. There's no rules to this. It's about going and having fun. Photograph every day, really important. And don't feel intimidated or overwhelmed by other people's success. Instagram is really good for making you feel like you are going nowhere. Don't let that happen. Don't feel intimidated or overwhelmed. Find a way to receive constructive criticism. Your family and friends will always tell you your images are perfect and they're beautiful. But that's why I go to a camera club, because that way I'm able to get constructive criticism on my images from someone who actually knows photography. So they will, and that's really good. It's a great way to learn to receive criticism. And then learn post-production. If you don't do post-production, learn post-production. It really does it really does add to your images. And then say yes to every opportunity. You know, sometimes my biggest opportunities were my most terrifying, but I've learned to say yes. I've learned to act calm on the surface and panic underneath. Even Google is your best friend. If you don't even know what the opportunity is, you can go and Google it. But yes, definitely try and say yes to every opportunity. And imposter syndrome is real in this game, people. So if you feel like you are not, you're not a photographer and you just want to learn, but you're terrified to enter competitions and you're terrified to put it out there that you're a photographer, everybody feels it. It's definitely part of this game. And, I think you've just got to bite the bullet and just put yourself out there and share your beautiful images with the world. And that's it. That's me. So if you my Instagram is Donna Crous, and then my portfolio can be found on donnacrous.com. So thank you for listening through all of that. You're muted.
Thank you very much, Donna. It was wonderful.
Good,
I wasn't a food photographer before, but I'm definitely going to use your tips to try to make something. And what I really like personally, that you're trying to encourage a lot of people believe that we are not talented in it. So
that is the biggest thing, is this fear, this imposter syndrome, this fear of calling yourself a photographer. I know, I've been there. And I remember when I changed my Facebook status to photographer, I thought, what is everybody going to think? Because I didn't go to university and study it, and I didn't qualify in photography, now suddenly I'm calling myself a photographer. And it's not that. If you have a passion for photography, and you don't have to be a printed photographer or be a named or a well-known photographer, you've just got to get out there. You've just got to put yourself out there, because it's never going to happen if you don't do that.
Thank you so much. We really enjoyed this class, and there is a few questions, but I think one of them you already answered, but there was a question from Stefan asking, do you use reflectors?
Yeah, so. I do. I not all the time, but I do use them. I actually prefer to use a little white bounce card, because I do like heavy shadows in my images. So I will use that white foam bounce card instead, because so say for instance in a cake picture, I don't want too much light across, too much reflected light across my images. I'll only want to change the shadows in a certain area. So I find that the little white card is easier for me to move around and to just angle it in a position where I want to soften the shadows. So it's really just a small area.
One more question from Sharna. Sorry if I mispronounced the names. Is it true that food should be best photographed cold?
Yeah, it is easier to photograph food when it's cold. Cakes, definitely. If you put them in the fridge, it's easier to slice them. You get less crumbs. Obviously, you have to be careful, because some food can, if you're dealing with stews or you're dealing with curries, the fat can start to congeal, which obviously isn't attractive. So you do have to be aware of how cold it is. But yes, it is easier, definitely easier to work with cold food. Yeah.
Okay. It's a good tip. Will you be hosting Nikon classes going forward, even though they have closed down their offices?
Yes, Inga, we are. We obviously just have no idea where we are at the moment and what's going on. Yeah, we are looking at doing some live online classes, but definitely we will. I love in-person classes. So I do think that in-person workshops are way better. So once things ease up and we're able to put a number of people in a room together, definitely, I will definitely be looking into that with Nikon. Yeah.
The answer is yeah.
Inga was actually booked for one of my workshops that was cancelled. So I do owe you one, Inga.
Okay. Do we have any more questions?
I do.
Yes, you do.
Yes, I do owe you one.
Okay, I think that's all. We have no more questions. And I want to thank you one more time. Thank you very much. It was a wonderful, wonderful class. Very interactive. Very
Good.
interactive.
I didn't put you all to sleep, did I?
No, you didn't. And very easy. So it's like you don't need to be a professional to understand it. You don't need to. So we really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for everybody for joining and for finding time. And we're wishing you all the best. Stay safe during this strange situation. Take care of your families and follow us on Instagram as ub.life. And we will come back to you with more interesting upcoming photography classes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And if anybody has any questions, they're welcome to contact me on Instagram. I'll happily answer. If you're a bit shy about putting it out in front of everybody, just send me a DM on Instagram. I'm happy to answer them.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Everybody is thanking you. The class was really wonderful. We really enjoyed
it. Good. Thank you.
And have a very lovely evening, everybody. And see you soon.
See you.
Bye. Bye. I'm pausing. I'm stopping it.